He was just a single dad trying to keep his daughter dry from the storm. But when he gave his only umbrella to the beautiful stranger huddled in a doorway, he never imagined she was a reclusive billionaire who had forgotten what kindness. It felt like a simple act that would unravel both their lives and stitch them back together, in a way neither of them could have ever predicted. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the rain didn't just fall. It crashed against the city with a cold, indifferent fury, a relentless drumming that turned the afternoon sky to the color of a bruised lion stood under the flimsy awning of the closed newsstand, one hand holding his daughter's small mitten-clad, one the other clutching the strap of his worn messenger bag that held nothing but a half-eaten apple and a stack of overdue bills. His jacket, once a respectable navy blue, was now faded at the elbows and soaked through at the shoulders, the kind of dampness that settled deep into your bones and reminded you of everything you lacked: warmth, dryness, and the simple luxury of not having to count every single dollar. He glanced down at Maya, her face upturned to the storm, her eyes wide with the kind of innocent wonder that hadn't yet learned to associate rain with leaky roofs and bus fares. They had just left the downtown library where he worked shelving books for a wage that barely covered their cramped apartment's rent. It was a job he loved, a quiet sanctuary of stories and forgotten knowledge, but love didn't pay the heating bill and the red-lettered envelope from the landlord that had arrived that morning was tucked in his pocket, a sharp-cornered reminder of how close they were to the edge. He squeezed her hand, gently trying to transfer a warmth. He didn't feel, "Looks like we're waiting this one out, kiddo," he said, forcing a cheerfulness that felt foreign on his tongue. Maya just nodded, her gaze fixed on a river of rainwater rushing down the gutter, carrying a stray leaf like a tiny, frantic boat. This was their life, a series of small, beautiful moments, stitched into a tapestry of quiet struggle. He protected her from the bigger picture, the way a thin coat protects you from a blizzard. Not perfectly, but with everything he had. That was when he saw her huddled in the recessed doorway of a high-end boutique whose windows displayed mannequins draped in silks and jewels that cost more than his yearly salary. She wasn't looking at the displays, she was staring out at the rain, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. A picture of polished solitude. Her clothes were simple, a camel-colored coat and dark jeans, but they fit with a kind of understated perfection that spoke of a world far removed from his own. She had no bag, no umbrella, no escape. Her hair, a cascade of dark silk, was already plastered to her cheeks, and the shiver that ran through her was visible even from across the street. Other people hurried past, heads down, collars up, a sea of black umbrellas bobbing in the gray light. But no one stopped. No one even glanced her way. It was the city's unspoken rule. You keep your eyes forward, you mind your own world. Liam watched for a second longer. Something in her stillness, her utter aloneness, struck a chord deep within him. He knew that feeling, not the loneliness of wealth, but the loneliness of being adrift in a world that wasn't built for you. He looked down at the umbrella in his own hand. Its handle was wrapped in electrical tape, and two of its spokes were slightly bent, giving it a perpetually lopsided grin. It was their only one, but it was dry. He let go of Maya's hand and told her to stay put for just a second. Before stepping out into the downpour, the cold rain hit him instantly, but he barely noticed his focus was on the woman who looked up, startled as he approached her eyes. A startling shade of blue were wide, with a mixture of confusion and a deep, guarded weariness. He didn't say much, just held out. "The umbrella here," he said, his voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. "You need this more than we do." And with that, he turned back before she could protest, before she could say a word, leaving her standing there with his battered umbrella in her hand, a small circle of dryness in the middle of the deluge, a silent offering from a complete stranger who had no idea he had just handed her the first real thing she had felt in years. Catherine Sterling stood frozen in the first doorway, the worn handle of the umbrella cool and solid in her grasp. The rain hammered down around her, but inside the small circle of protection, the world was strangely quiet. She watched the man's retreating back, his soaked jacket clinging to his shoulders, as he took the little girl's hand and guided her under the flimsy protection of another awning. Further down the street, he never looked back. He hadn't waited for a thank, you hadn't lingered for a reward, hadn't even seemed to register that he had just done something extraordinary. He had simply seen a need and met it, an act so pure and uncalculated. It felt like a foreign language in the world she inhabited. Her world was one of transactions of carefully weighed favors and strategic kindness. People didn't give you something for free, they invested it, expecting a return. Her own father had taught her that lesson before she could even read, teaching her to see people not as souls but as assets or liabilities for years. That worldview had served her well. It had helped her navigate the shark-infested waters of boardrooms and shareholder meetings. It had given her the armor she needed to take over Sterling Global when her father's health failed, turning it into an even bigger titan of industry than he had ever dreamed. She was powerful, respected, feared, and utterly isolated. She had a penthouse that overlooked the entire city, a staff that anticipated her every need, and a phone that buzzed with requests from some of the most influential people on the planet. But she hadn't had a real conversation in months, one that didn't involve quarterly reports or market projections. She had walked out of a tense meeting that afternoon, needing air, needing to feel something other than the crushing weight of her own empire, and had been caught in the storm, a fitting metaphor for her life. She supposed she had been standing there for what felt like an eternity, feeling the cold seep into her bones, watching the person aboard city move on without her, a ghost in her own life. And then he appeared, a man with tired eyes and a gentle face who gave her his only shield without a second thought. It was a small thing, a battered umbrella with a taped-up handle, but it felt monumental. It was a crack in the glass wall she had built around herself, a sliver of light in the curated darkness she called a life. She looked down at the umbrella, then back at the man and his daughter, now huddled together a block away, their shapes blurred by the rain he had given her, a piece of his world, a world where people still looked out for each other. And for the first time, in a very long time, Catherine Sterling felt a pang of something she couldn't name, a deep, resonant ache that was 1 part gratitude and 2 parts envy. She wanted to know more about the man who carried kindness like it, weighed nothing at all. Liam hustled Maya the rest of the way home, the rain soaking through his thin sweater and chilling him to the bone. By the time they climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, his teeth were chattering, but he kept a smile plastered on his face, for her sake. Their apartment was small, the kind of place where you could hear the neighbors arguing through the walls, and the radiator hissed like a cornered snake. But it was home. It was filled with the scent of old books and Maya's faint crayon-scented presence. He stripped off their wet clothes, hung them over the shower rod, and wrapped Maya in the warmest, fluffiest towel they owned, which wasn't very fluffy at all. She didn't seem to notice. "That was a big rain, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled by the terry cloth. "Sure was, kiddo," he replied, running a hand through her damp hair. "But we made it." He didn't mention the umbrella. He didn't want her to worry, or to think they had given away something they couldn't afford to lose to him. It was a simple equation. A person was in need. He had something that could help, end of story. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was just what you did. But as he made them grilled cheese for dinner, standing over the stove in a dry t-shirt and worn sweatpants, he couldn't get the image of the woman out of his head. It wasn't her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was the look in her eyes, a deep, profound loneliness that he recognized because he saw a version of it in his own mirror. Every morning, it was the quiet grief of navigating a world that had taken something precious from you and left you to figure out the rest on your own. For him, it had been his wife taken by an illness that came on fast and left a hole in their lives that no amount of time could ever fully patch. He had been adrift for years, after learning to be both mother and father, learning to balance grief with the relentless demands of keeping a small child's world bright and safe. He had become an expert at pretending, at shielding Maya from the quiet desperation that sometimes gnawed at him in the dead of night. He had built a fortress of love and routine around her, and it had kept them afloat. But it had also kept him isolated. He didn't have time for friends, let alone romance. His world was his daughter and his books, and the constant low-level hum of financial anxiety. The woman in the doorway was a reminder of a world outside his own, a world of camel-colored coats and unspoken sadness, a world he had no business thinking about, and yet he did. He wondered who she was, where she was going, what storm she was caught in, that had nothing to do with the weather. He replayed the moment over and over. The way she looked up at him with those startled blue eyes, the way her fingers had brushed his as she took the umbrella. It was a fleeting connection, a moment of shared humanity in a city that often felt devoid of it. He knew he would likely never see her again. She was a ship passing in the night, a beautiful ghost in a rainstorm, but the memory of her lingered, a quiet, unsettling warmth that had nothing to do with the hissing radiator in the corner. Next day the sun returned weak and watery, as if exhausted from the previous day's outburst. Liam walked Maya to the bus stop, his hands tucked deep in his pockets. The air was crisp and clean, and the city seemed to have washed itself anew. But the feeling of the encounter lingered. He found himself scanning the faces in the crowd, searching for a glimpse of camel and dark silk. An irrational habit he couldn't seem to shake. At the library, the day passed in a quiet blur of shelving books and answering questions from patrons. His boss, Mrs. Gable, a woman with kind eyes and a spine made of steel, noticed his distraction. "Penny for your thoughts, Liam," she said, her voice raspy from a lifetime of whispered shushing. "You've been a million miles away all morning." He offered a weak smile. "Just thinking. About that leak in your ceiling, or the fact that our new budget means we can't afford to replace the 19th century literature section's carpet, which I'm fairly certain is now a sentient being?" she asked, with a wry grin. Liam chuckled. "A little of both, I guess." He didn't tell her about the woman. It felt too personal, too strange to put into words. How could he explain that a 2-second interaction with a stranger had unsettled him more than the threat of eviction? He spent the rest of the day in the archives, organizing dusty first editions that smelled of vanilla and time, a task he usually loved for its meditative quality, but today his mind kept wandering. He imagined her walking into the library, her eyes scanning the shelves, her quiet presence, a stark contrast to the bustling world outside. He imagined what he would say, what she would say. It was a foolish fantasy, a story he was writing in his head with a character he didn't even know the name of. When he left work that evening, the sky was painted in shades of lavender and rose. The city was settling into its nighttime rhythm, and the weight of his own life came rushing back. He had to pick up groceries, figure out what to do about the bill from the clinic for Maya's last checkup, and try to ignore the gnawing emptiness that had become his constant companion. But as he walked past the groceries conduit, same corner where he'd seen her, he slowed his steps. The boutique's windows were dark. Now the mannequins standing like silent sentinels in the gloom. He paused for just a moment, half expecting to see her there again, ridiculous hope that made his chest ache. He shook his head and kept walking, dismissing it as a momentary lapse in his carefully constructed reality. He was a man with real problems. He didn't have time for ghosts in camel coats, but the memory of her kindness magnet, her haunted gaze, had burrowed under his skin, and he had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to leave anytime soon. Catherine spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed exile within her own penthouse. The umbrella he had given her sat propped against the wall by the door, a stark and humble contrast to the minimalist art and polished chrome that filled her apartment. She had ordered her assistant to cancel all her meetings, citing a sudden illness, a lie that felt uncomfortably close to the truth. She was sick. Sick of the endless performance, the crushing expectations, the suffocating loneliness of her life. She would stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows and watch the city move below a complex machine, of which she was a vital yet disconnected part. She thought about the man and the little girl. Their faces were etched into her memory, his tired but gentle eyes, her bright, innocent smile. They were a snapshot of a life so different from her own, a life that seemed to be measured in love and connection, not profit margins and stock prices. On the third day, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. She put on a simple pair of jeans, a gray cashmere sweater, and a pair of flat boots. A deliberate costume of normalcy. She grabbed the umbrella and walked out of her building, foregoing her usual driver and hailing a cab. A thrill of anonymity shot through her as she slid into the back seat. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. She hesitated for a moment, then gave him the address of the main branch of the city's public library. She didn't know why she was going there. It was an impulse, a pull toward the one place in the city that felt like it might belong to his world, a world of quiet contemplation and shared stories. The library was a grand old building, a cathedral of knowledge with soaring ceilings and the hushed reverence of a sacred space. She walked through the doors, the scent of old paper and floor polish enveloping her. She wandered through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books. Her own name had graced the covers of countless business magazines. She couldn't remember the last time she had read a book for pleasure. For escape, she found a quiet corner in the fiction section and sat down pretending to read. But her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for a familiar face. It was a long shot, a fool's errand, but she couldn't help it. And then she saw him. He was in the children's section on his knees, helping a group of kids build a tower out of oversized foam blocks. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his face was animated, with a patient, gentle smile. The little girl Maya was there too, her laughter echoing softly in the cavernous room. Catherine's heart gave a painful lurch. He worked here. Of course he did. It was perfect. It was so perfectly him. She watched them for what felt like an eternity, a silent observer on the edge of their sunlit world. He was so good with the children, so natural, so present. It was a quality she had rarely encountered in the men. She knew men who were always checking their phones, always looking over your shoulder for someone. More important to talk to this man was different. He was rooted, present, real. When the children's story hour ended, he stood up, brushing foam dust from his jeans, and his eyes swept the room. That's when he saw her. His smile faltered for a second, a flicker of surprise and recognition in his eyes. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't planned this. She didn't know what to do, what to say. But it was too late. He was already walking toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. And the vast, quiet library suddenly felt as small and intimate as a whispered secret Lime couldn't believe his eyes. It was her, the woman from the storm, standing there in the fiction aisle, looking just as lost and out of place as she had in that doorway. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the library's hush. Had told himself it was a one-time thing, a fleeting moment that he had built up in his mind. But here she was, real and solid, and looking right at him, he walked toward her, his legs feeling strangely unsteady. He felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness, acutely aware of his worn jeans, and the faint stain on his shirt from Maya's juice box spill. Earlier that morning, what was she doing here? Had she come to return the umbrella? Was she looking for him? He stopped a few feet away from her, unsure of the etiquette for a situation like this. "Hi," he said, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. "Hi," she replied. Her voice was soft, a low melody that seemed to fit the space perfectly. I came to return this." She held up the umbrella which she had been holding at her side. He hadn't even noticed it. "Oh?" he said, reaching for it. "You didn't have to do that. I figured you might need it." "I'm Catherine, by the way," she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. "Him? That's a nice name?" "It's a good name," Hiam stammered, feeling like a fool. The The silence stretched between them for a moment, thick with unspoken questions. Just then Maya came, running up, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Mrs. Gable says we can get a new book about dragons." She stopped short when she saw Catherine, her head tilting in that curious way she had. "Who are you?" Catherine knelt down so she was at Maya's level, her smile turning genuine and warm. "My name is Catherine. What's yours?" "I'm Maya," she said proudly. "Are you my daddy's friend?" Liam's face flushed. "Maya, honey, that's not a polite question to ask." But Catherine just laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "It's okay, I'd like to be." She looked up at Liam, her blue eyes holding his. "If that's all right." Ham found his voice. "Yeah, of course it's all right." They stood there for another moment, a strange little trio, in the middle of the library. The world seemed to fade away, leaving just the three of them. In a bubble of quiet potential, Catherine's gaze was open, vulnerable in a way that disarmed him. She wasn't the untouchable ghost from the storm anymore. She was just a woman with a kind smile and a sadness that still lingered in the corners of her eyes. "I work here," Liam said, stating the obvious just to fill the silence. "I figured," she replied. "It suits you." Before he could ask what she meant by that, Maya tugged on Catherine's sleeve. "Do you like dragons?" Catherine's smile widened. "I love dragons, especially the ones that breathe fire," Maya gasped in delight. "Me too!" She grabbed Catherine's hand. "Come on, I'll show you the best one." And just like that, she was pulled away into Maya's orbit, led by a small, determined hand toward the picture book section. Liam watched them go. A strange mix of apprehension and something that felt dangerously like hope churning in his chest. He didn't know who Catherine was or what she was doing in his quiet world, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt the faintest whisper of a possibility that his story wasn't over yet, that maybe, just maybe, there was another chapter, waiting to be written the next week, unfolded like a dream, a series of small, perfect moments that felt both unreal and deeply grounding. Catherine started visiting the library. Almost every day she would arrive in the afternoon, just as Maya was getting out of school, and sit in a worn armchair in the children's section, pretending to read, but mostly just watching them. She never asked for anything. She never pushed. She just existed on the periphery of their world, a quiet, steady presence that slowly became a part of it. Maya adored her. She would save her best drawings for Kat, as she had taken to calling her, and would regale her with long, rambling stories about her day at school. Catherine would listen with a rapt attention that made Maya feel like the most important person in the world. Liam found himself looking forward to her visits more than he was willing to admit. They would talk in hushed tones while Maya was absorbed in a book. Their conversations were simple and unassuming. He told her about his love for history, about the way the library felt like a time machine, about his dreams of one day owning his own small bookstore. She told him about her love for art, her travels to far-off places, her feeling of being untethered. She spoke of her life in vague terms, a demanding job, a need for a change of pace. He never pressed for details. He didn't want to break the fragile spell they were under. He just enjoyed the way she looked at him, like he was someone worth listening to. One rainy afternoon, after the library had closed, they found themselves huddled under the same awning where he had first seen her. This time they were sharing the umbrella, their shoulders brushing as they walked toward the bus stop. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd see you again after that first day." Catherine looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "I didn't think I would either, but I couldn't." "Forget." "Forget what?" he asked. "The umbrella?" "No," she said softly. "The kindness, I don't think I'd ever experienced it before. Not like that, not without strings attached." Her admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and profound. He wanted to ask her more, wanted to understand the world she came from, that was so devoid of simple grace. But he didn't. He just held the umbrella a little tighter, shielding her from the rain. As the bus pulled up, she hesitated before getting on. "Would you maybe want to get some coffee sometime?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Outside of the library, I mean." Ham's heart gave a hopeful leap. "I'd like that a lot." As he watched the bus pull away, he realized with a terrifying clarity that he was falling for her. He was falling for a woman. He knew almost nothing about a beautiful enigma with sad eyes and a gentle soul, and he knew it was reckless. He knew he was setting himself up for a fall. But as he walked home in the Prostat rain, a slow smile spread across his face. For the first time in years, he felt like he was walking toward something. Instead of just walking away, the coffee shop was a small, cozy place tucked away on a side street with mismatched chairs and Probolive.com. The rich aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon lime had chosen it, specifically because it was the opposite of the polished, sterile cafes that lined the main avenues. It was a place with character, a place that felt real. He arrived early, nervous energy buzzing under his skin. He had changed his shirt 3 times before settling on a simple gray Henley that was clean and unwrinkled. A small victory in itself. He sat at a small table by the window, watching the people pass by. Each one a story he would never know. He was so lost in thought that he didn't see her until she was standing right in front of him. "Sorry, I'm late," Catherine said, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "The traffic was a nightmare." "No problem, I just got here," he lied. Standing up to greet her, she was wearing a dark green sweater that made her eyes look even bluer. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, and for a moment he forgot how to speak. They ordered coffee and sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments, just sipping and watching the world go by. "So," she said finally, "tell me something about you that I don't know." He thought for a moment. "I'm terrified of heights," he admitted with a sheepish grin, like, can't even stand on a chair, terrified. She laughed, a genuine musical sound that made his chest ache. "Really, the man who shelves books on the top ladder? That's different," he said. "That's for the sake of literature," she smiled. "Okay, your turn." He leaned forward. "Tell me your biggest dream." Catherine's smile faded slightly, her gaze drifting to the window. "I don't know if I have one anymore." "Everyone has a dream," he insisted, "even if it's buried." She was quiet for a long time, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. "I guess," she said slowly, "I've always dreamed of having a small house by the sea with a big, messy garden where I can paint all day and not have to talk to anyone if I don't want to." The image was so vivid, so simple, and so at odds with the polished woman. He thought he was getting to know. "What's stopping you?" he asked gently. She gave a small, sad smile. "Life, I guess." He didn't push. He just nodded, understanding that some dreams were more fragile than others. They talked for hours about everything, and nothing: books, music, the gay percent. The way the city changed at night with each passing minute, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. He was drawn to her quiet strength, her hidden vulnerability, her sharp intelligence. He was seeing past the beautiful face to the complex, wounded soul beneath, and it was a soul he felt a deep, inexplicable connection to as they left the coffee shop. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. They walked in silence for a few blocks, their hands brushing, occasionally sending a jolt of electricity through him. When they reached the corner where they had to part, he found himself not wanting to say goodbye. "I had a really nice time, Liam," she said, her voice soft. "Me too," he replied, his gaze holding hers. He wanted to kiss her more than he had wanted anything in a long time, but he held back. He didn't want to rush this to break the delicate, fragile thing that was growing between them, so he just smiled and said, "I'll see you at the library." As he watched her walk away, he knew he was in deeper than he had ever been, and for the first time, the thought didn't terrify him. It thrilled him. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and quiet discoveries. Liam and Catherine's bond deepened with each passing day. They fell into a comfortable rhythm: coffee on Tuesdays, walks in the park on Fridays, and long lazy afternoons at the HR library, where Maya would serve as their small chaperone, chattering away while they exchanged quiet glances over the tops of books. Liam found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone since his wife. He told her about the crushing weight of his grief, the fear of failing Maya, the constant struggle to make ends meet. She listened without judgment, without pity. Her presence, a calm and steady anchor in the storm of his life. Catherine in turn began to shed her own layers of armor. She told him about her lonely childhood, her strained relationship with her father, her feeling of being a cog in a machine she couldn't control. She spoke of a life of immense privilege that felt more like a gilded cage. And he began to understand the source of the sadness in her eyes. One Saturday afternoon they took Maya to the local botanical garden. It was a beautiful day, the sun warm on their skin, and the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Maya ran ahead, chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the trees. Liam and Catherine walked behind their hands, brushing. So often it was no longer an accident. "She's so happy when you're around," he said quietly, watching his daughter. "So am I," Catherine replied, her voice so soft. He almost missed it. He stopped walking and turned to her, his heart in his throat. "Catherine," he began. But before he could finish, she reached up and gently touched his cheek. Her fingers were cool and soft against his skin. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." And then she leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft, tentative kiss, a question and an answer. All in one, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of sunlight and blossoming flowers. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a moment he would replay in his mind 1,000 times over in the days to come. They were falling in love, and it was both the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. He knew there were still so many things he didn't know about her, so many unanswered questions. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the feel of her lips on his, the warmth of her hand in his, and the belief that, maybe, just maybe, they had found something real, something worth fighting for. But he was a man who lived in a world of harsh realities, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their idyllic bubble was bound to burst. It was a Tuesday morning when the first crack appeared. Liam was on his lunch break, grabbing a sandwich from the deli across the street from the library. He was thumbing through a newspaper someone had left on the counter when a Y headline caught his eye. "Sterling Global CEO. Catherine Sterling remains out of public eye." Amid merger rumors, the words jumped off the page, sharp and jarring. He stared at the picture accompanying the article, a black and white photo of a woman with a confident smile and sharp, intelligent eyes. It was her. It was Catherine. But it wasn't. It was a version of her. He had never seen a woman of power and influence, a titan of industry, the CEO of one of the largest multinational corporations in the world. His sandwich sat forgotten in his hand. His mind reeled. Sterling Global. He knew the name, everyone did. They owned everything from tech companies to media outlets. Their logo was plastered on billboards and buildings all over the city. And Catherine, the quiet, gentle woman who loved dragons and dreamed of a house by the sea, was the one in charge. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of his lungs. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. It wasn't anger. Not at first. It was a profound sense of dislocation, a feeling of being untethered from reality. The woman he was falling in love with, the woman who had shared her vulnerabilities and her dreams with him. There was a billionaire, a fact. She had conveniently omitted from their conversations. He stumbled out of the deli, the newspaper clutched in his hand. He walked in a daze, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. He thought back to all their conversations, her vague references to a demanding job, her need for a change of pace. It all made a sick kind of sense. Now she wasn't just taking a break, she was hiding from a life of unimaginable wealth and power, hiding in his simple, unassuming world. He felt like a fool, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Had it all been a lie? Had she been slumming it with the poor librarian just to get a taste of the simple life? Before returning to her throne, he went back to the library, but he couldn't focus. The books blurred before his eyes, the words meaningless. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew he had to confront her, but he didn't know how. What could he possibly say? To a woman who lived in a different universe, a woman who had the power to buy and sell his entire world without a second thought. He waited for her to arrive that afternoon, his heart a leaden weight in his second chest. When she walked in, her face lighting up. When she saw him, he felt a pang of grief for the simple, beautiful thing he thought they had, because he knew that after today, nothing would ever be the same again. Catherine walked into the Prussian library that afternoon with a lightness in her step that had become increasingly familiar. The past few weeks, she was carrying a small bag from a local bakery filled with Maya's favorite chocolate chip cookies, a small offering to sweeten their afternoon. She spotted Liam by the reference desk, and her heart did its usual little flip, a warm, hopeful flutter that had become the best part of her day. But as she got closer, she saw the look on his face, and the lightness in her chest evaporated. His smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained expression. His eyes, which usually held a warm, gentle light, were dark and unreadable. "Liam?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, his gaze intense and searching. Then he held up the newspaper. He had been holding his hand, trembling slightly. "Is this you?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Catherine's blood ran cold. She saw the headline. The picture, her carefully constructed world of anonymity, shattered in an instant. "Liam, I can explain," she began, her voice pleading. But he cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "Explain what, Catherine? That you're the CEO of Sterling Global? That you're a billionaire? That you've been lying to me this whole time?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with a quiet, wounded fury that was more devastating than any shout. "I wasn't lying," she insisted. "I just didn't tell you." "What's the difference?" he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You let me talk about my struggles, my fears, my pathetic little life while you were sitting on a mountain of money. You let me believe we were in the same world when we're not even in the Prashinover same solar system." "It wasn't like that," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't want you to treat me differently. I wanted you to see me for me, not for my money." "And what did you see me as?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "A little project? A vacation from your real life? The poor librarian you could rescue with a few kind words and a sad smile?" "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I saw you as the kindest, most genuine man I had ever met. I saw you as someone who made me feel real for the first time in my life." But her words couldn't bridge the chasm that had opened up between them. He looked at her with a mixture of pain and disillusionment that broke her heart. "I think you should go," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Catherine stood there for a moment, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She had known this moment would come. She had dreaded it, lived in fear of it, but she had never imagined it would hurt this much. She turned and walked away, the bag of cookies forgotten on the floor, the scent of chocolate and shattered dreams mingling in the air. Liam watched her go, his own heart, a hollow ache in his chest. He had pushed her away because he was hurt, because he was scared, because he felt like he had been made a fool of. But as he watched her disappear through the library doors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The days that followed the confrontation were a study in gray. Liam moved through his life like a ghost. The colors of his world muted and dull. The library, which had once been his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Each aisle a reminder of her. Her laughter seemed to echo in the quiet corners. And he saw her face in the pages of every book he shelved. He was consumed by a quiet, simmering anger, an anger that was directed as much at himself as it was at her. He was angry at her, for her deception, for the casual way she had stepped into his life and turned it upside down, but he was also angry at himself for his own naivete, for letting his guard down, for believing in a fairy tale that was never meant for him. Maya noticed the change in him. Immediately she was quieter, more subdued, her usual bright energy dimmed by his somber mood. "Is Kat mad at us, Daddy?" she asked one evening, her voice small and sad. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Kat's just busy." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. He tried to distract himself with work with Maya, with the relentless routine of his life. But the emptiness she had left behind was a gaping wound that refused to heal. He missed her. He missed her quiet strength, her gentle smile, her sad, beautiful eyes. He missed the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the world. He missed the person he was when he was with her, the man who dared to hope again, the man who believed in second chances. He was lost in a sea of regret and confusion, not knowing how to navigate his way back to shore. Catherine, meanwhile, had retreated back into her gilded cage. She threw herself into her work with a fierce manic energy that worried her staff. She was ruthless in meetings, sharp and decisive. Her days were a blur of conference calls and financial reports, a carefully constructed wall of paucity when forsengel of rengeli to posel, noise to drown out the silence in her heart. But at night, when she was alone in her penthouse, the silence would return. Deafening and all-consuming, she would stare out at the city lights, the same lights that had once made her feel so powerful, and now only served to remind her of how truly alone she was. She had made a terrible mistake. She had let her fear and her pride get in the way of the one real thing she had ever found. She had hurt the kindest man she had ever known, and she didn't know how to fix it. She had 1,000 resources at her fingertips. She could buy anything she wanted, but she couldn't buy back his trust. She couldn't erase the lie she had told with her silence. One evening, she found herself standing in front of the library, the grand old building, a silent testament to the life she had briefly touched. She watched the people come and go, families, students, lovers, and she felt a pang of longing, so sharp it took her breath away. She wanted to go in to find him, to beg for his forgiveness, but she couldn't. She had no right to disrupt his life again. She had caused him enough pain, so she just stood there in the cold, a ghost on the edge of his world, watching the warm light spill out onto the street, a light she was no longer welcome in. The story broke on a Thursday, a slow news day that was suddenly ignited by a single leaked photograph. It was a grainy picture taken with a Rana, long lens camera showing Catherine and Liam walking in the park. Their hands almost touching. The headline was sensational and cruel. Billionaire CEO. Catherine Sterling's secret romance with a penniless librarian. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and condescension, painting Liam as a naive gold digger and Catherine as a reckless heiress, toying with the lives of the less fortunate. It was a public relations nightmare, a scandal that threatened to destabilize her company and destroy his quiet life. The media descended on the library like a pack of wolves. Reporters camped out on the steps, their cameras and microphones, a constant menacing presence. They ambushed Liam on his way to work, shouting questions about his relationship with Catherine Sterling, his intentions, his financial situation. He tried to ignore them, to push past them, but they were relentless. A faceless mob, hungry for a story. Liam's world, which was already fragile, shattered completely. The library was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage, and he was the unwilling star of a tragicomedy. He couldn't escape the whispers and stares of his co-workers, the pitying glances of the patrons. Mrs. Gable tried to protect him, but there was little she could do. The board of Sterling Global was in an uproar. They called an emergency meeting, demanding that Catherine take control of the situation. Her father, whose health had been failing, called her for the first time in months, his voice weak but sharp with disapproval. "You've made a mess, Catherine," he said. "A public, embarrassing mess. You need to fix it." The pressure was immense. Suffocating, Catherine felt like she was drowning in a sea of her own making. She had tried to escape her world, but it had followed her, and in its wake it had destroyed the one person she had ever truly cared about. He stopped answering her calls, her texts, her desperate emails. He had retreated into a shell of silence, and she couldn't blame him. She had brought this storm into his life, and he was now paying the price for her carelessness. One evening, unable to bear the guilt and the silence any longer, she drove to his apartment. She sat in her car across the street for hours, watching the light in his presence window. A small beacon of warmth in the cold, dark city. She saw him come home, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his face a mask of exhaustion. She saw Maya run to him, her small arms wrapping around his legs, a silent offering of comfort and love. It was a scene of such simple, profound love that it broke Catherine's heart. She knew then what she had to do. She had to disappear from his life. Completely. It was the only way to give him back his peace, the only way to protect him from the world she had so carelessly dragged him into. With a heavy heart, she started the car and drove away, leaving him to the quiet life. She had so thoroughly and unintentionally ruined Liam's life. Slowly began to return to a calm semblance of normalcy after Catherine left. The media storm eventually subsided. The reporters packed up their cameras and moved on to the next scandal, and the library once again became a quiet haven of books and solitude. But the silence she left behind was a different kind of silence, a hollow, aching void that seemed to echo in every corner of his life. He missed her with a fierce intensity that surprised him. He missed her laughter, her intelligence, her quiet strength. He missed the way she made him feel seen and understood. He was a man adrift again, but this time he was adrift in a sea of what-ifs and what-could-have-beens. Maya was the one who pulled him back from the brink. She was a resilient little soul. Her sadness over Catherine's departure slowly giving way to a quiet acceptance. She would still talk about Cat, sometimes her voice tinged with a wistful longing. But she did so with a strength and a wisdom that belied her years. "It's okay, Daddy," she said one evening as he was tucking her into bed. "Sometimes people have to leave even when they don't want to." Her words were a simple, profound truth that cut through his own self-pity and regret. He realized that he had been so focused on his own pain that he had neglected the one person who needed him the most. He had to be strong for her. He had to rebuild their world one small brick at a time. He started by focusing on the library. He threw himself into his work, organizing community events, starting a book club for seniors, anything to fill the empty hours and to bring life back into the space he loved. He also started writing again, a long-forgotten passion he had abandoned. After his wife's death, he would stay up late at night after Maya was asleep, pouring his thoughts and his feelings onto the page, creating stories of love and loss and redemption. It was a cathartic process, a way of making sense of the chaos in his own heart. Catherine, in the meantime, had returned to her role as the formidable CEO of Sterling Global. She was a woman on a mission, a force of nature who was determined to right the wrongs of her past. She restructured her company, implementing new policies that prioritized ethical practices and employee well-being. She started a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting education and the arts, pouring millions of dollars into underfunded schools and libraries. She was trying to use her power for good, to create a legacy that was about more than just profit, but it was a lonely existence, a life devoid of personal connection. She had built a fortress around her heart, and no one was allowed in. But she never forgot Liam and Maya. They were a constant ache in her heart, a reminder of a life she had briefly touched and then lost. She would sometimes find herself staring at a picture she had taken of them at the botanical garden, a candid shot of Liam, laughing, his head thrown back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated joy, and it was a joy she feared she would never feel again. One day, her assistant brought her a stack of mail, and in it was a small, unassuming book, a children's book with a simple hand-drawn cover. It was called The Girl and the Umbrella. She opened it and began to read. It was a story about a lonely girl who lived in a tall glass tower and a kind man who gave her his umbrella in a storm, a man who taught her about kindness and love and the magic of a simple shared story. The words were beautiful and poignant, and they brought tears to her eyes. She turned to the last page and saw the author's name, Liam, a single name, a quiet testament to a story that was not yet over. The publication of The Girl and the Umbrella was a small, quiet affair. There was no big marketing campaign, no splashy launch party, just a few glowing reviews in literary journals and a slow-growing word-of-mouth buzz. It was a simple story, but it resonated with people. Its themes of kindness and connection, striking a chord in a world that often felt cold and disconnected. Liam was surprised by its success. He had written the book for himself, for Maya, as a way of processing his own grief and his own story. He had never expected it to find an audience, but it did. And with its success came a small measure of financial security, a relief that was so profound it almost felt unreal. He was able to pay off his debts, to fix the leaky roof in their apartment, and to even start a small savings account for Maya's future. It was a new chapter for them, a chapter of stability and hope. But even with his newfound success, a piece of him was still missing. He would often find himself thinking of Catherine, wondering where she was, what she was doing. If she was happy, he had sent her a copy of the book, a silent offering, a message in a bottle cast out into the sea of their shared past. But he had received no reply, and the silence was a constant reminder of the chasm that still existed between them. Catherine had read the book 100 times, her tears staining the pages. It was his voice, his heart, his story laid bare on the page, and it was a story that was as much about her as it was about him. It was a story of forgiveness and redemption, a story that offered a sliver of hope in the darkness of her own regret. The book was a catalyst, a wake-up call she had been hiding behind her work, her philanthropy, her carefully constructed wall of professionalism, but it was a hollow existence, a life devoid of the one thing that truly mattered: love. She knew she had to see him, she had to tell him that she was sorry, that she had never stopped loving him, that she was ready to fight for a second chance. She booked a flight to his city, a one-way ticket with no return date. She was done with running. She was ready to face her past and to build a future. A future that she hoped still included him. She arrived on a crisp autumn day, the leaves on the trees, a fiery riot of red and gold. She walked to the library, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she would say, what she would do, but she knew she had to try. She opened the doors and stepped inside, the scent of old books and familiar memories washing over her. She saw him at the reference desk, talking to a patron. His face was the same, kind and gentle, but there was a new confidence in his eyes, a new strength in his posture. He looked up and saw her, and the world seemed to stop. He stood there for a moment, frozen in surprise. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and lit up the entire room. It was a smile of recognition, of forgiveness, of hope, and in that smile, Catherine knew that she was finally home. The library was quiet, the late afternoon sun slanting through the tall arched windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor. Liam and Catherine stood facing each other, the air between them, thick with unspoken words and a shared history of pain and love. "You came back?" he said, his voice a low, gentle murmur. "I had to," she replied, her own voice trembling slightly. "I read your book. I was hoping you would." "It was beautiful, Ham," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "It was our story." "Yes," he said, "it was." He took a step closer, his hand reaching for hers, their fingers intertwined, a familiar and yet new sensation. "I'm so sorry, Catherine," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a fool to push you away. I was scared and I was hurt, and I let my pride get in the way of the best thing that ever happened to me." "No," she said, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I was the one who lied. I was the one who broke your trust. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I ended up hurting you, and that's a regret I will carry with me for the rest of my life." "We were both scared," he said. "We were both broken, but maybe we can be broken together." She looked up at him, her blue eyes shining with a hope she thought she had lost forever. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." Just then, Maya came running into the room, her pigtails flying behind her. She stopped short when she saw Catherine, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Cat?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of joy and confusion. Catherine knelt down and opened her arms, and Maya ran into them, burying her face in Catherine's shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. "I missed you," she cried. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Catherine said, her own tears falling freely. "I missed you so much." Hem watched them, his heart so full, it felt like it might burst. He had his family back, his strange, beautiful, broken family, and in that moment he knew that everything was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. The months that followed were a testament to the power of second chances. Liam and Catherine rebuilt their relationship. Slowly, carefully, brick by brick. They were honest with each other brutally. So at times they talked about their fears, their insecurities, their past hurts. They laid their souls bare, and in doing so, they forged a bond that was stronger and more resilient than before. Catherine made a series of bold changes in her life. She stepped down as CEO of Sterling Global, taking on a less demanding role as chair of the board. She sold her penthouse in the city and bought a small house by the sea, the same one she had dreamed of so many years ago. It had a big, messy garden and a small art studio where she painted for hours on end. Liam and Maya moved in with her. Their small apartment, a distant memory. Their new home was filled with laughter and love and the scent of salty air and froms. Wet paint. Liam started writing full-time, his books becoming a quiet sensation. He never sought the spotlight, preferring the quiet life they had built. Together, a life of simple pleasures and deep connection. They were a family in every sense of the word. A family, born not of blood, but of choice, of love, of forgiveness. One sunny afternoon they were all sitting on the porch of their beach house watching the waves crash against the shore. Maya was drawing in a sketchbook, a new passion she had discovered under Catherine's tutelage. Liam was reading a book, his arm around Catherine's shoulders, her head resting on his chest. It was a scene of perfect contentment, a scene he had never dared to dream of. "You know," Catherine said quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon, "I used to think that happiness was something you had to earn, something you had to fight for. And now?" he asked, his lips brushing against her hair. "Now," she said with a smile, "I know that happiness is something you find in the most unexpected places, in the kindness of a stranger, in the laughter of a child, in the quiet moments when you realize you're finally home." He kissed the top of her head, his heart overflowing with a love so profound it left him breathless. "I love you, Catherine Sterling," he whispered. "I love you too, Liam," she replied. "My librarian, my author, my umbrella-wielding hero." And as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they knew that their story was far from over. It was just beginning. A great love story, written not in the stars, but in the simple, everyday magic of a second chance. A love that was as real and as enduring as the ocean itself. A love that had been born from a single act of kindness, a single moment of connection on the middle of a storm. A love that had weathered its own storms and had come out stronger, more beautiful, and more resilient on the other side. It was a love that proved that sometimes the most extraordinary things can happen in the most ordinary of lives. A love that was a testament to the fact that it's never too late to find your way home. He stood at the edge of the water, the cool Atlantic breeze whipping through his hair, a contented smile playing on his lips. Maya was a little further down the beach, her laughter carrying on the wind as she chased the waves, her small form a bland, vibrant splash of color against the pale sand. Catherine was on the porch. Her easel set up her hand, moving with a fluid grace as she captured the scene on her canvas. Her face was relaxed, her eyes bright with a peace he had never seen in her. Before this was their life. Now a quiet symphony of love and creativity. A life that was so far removed from the worlds they had once inhabited. It felt like a different dimension, a better one. He still couldn't quite believe it. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and reach for her just to make sure she was real, just to make sure he wasn't dreaming, and she would be there, her warmth, a steady presence beside him, a silent reassurance that this was their reality, their beautiful, improbable reality. He had learned so much from her, about courage, about resilience, about the importance of fighting for what you believe in. But the greatest lesson she had taught him was about forgiveness. She had forgiven him for his pride, for his fear, for pushing her away, and in doing so, she had taught him how to forgive himself. He had let go of the anger and the bitterness that had been weighing him down for so long, and he had embraced the future with an open heart, a heart that was no longer afraid of being broken because he knew that with her by his side, he could weather any storm. He looked back at the house, at the woman who was his wife, his partner, his best friend, and his heart swelled with a love so immense, it was almost painful. He was a lucky man, a man who had been given a second chance at happiness, a man who had found his soulmate in the most unlikely of circumstances. He walked back toward the porch, his steps light and sure. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Resting his chin on her shoulder, she leaned back into him, her body soft and pliant against his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice a low, gentle murmur. "I'm thinking," he said, his lips brushing against her ear, "that I'm the luckiest man in the world." She turned in his arms, her blue eyes shining with a love that mirrored his own. "No," she said with a smile, "I am." And as they stood there on the porch of their home by the sea, the waves crashing against the shore and the sun warming their skin, they knew that they had found their happily ever after. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was messy. It was beautiful. And it was theirs, a love story that would be told and retold for generations to come. A story of hope, of redemption, and of the transformative power of a single act of kindness, a single moment of connection, a single umbrella shared in the middle of a storm. And so their days flowed one into the next, a gentle current of shared moments and quiet joys. The bookstore Liam had always dreamed of became a reality. A cozy little shop in the nearby coastal town with a crackling fireplace and armchairs. So comfortable you could lose yourself for hours. Catherine's paintings filled the walls, her vibrant canvases a testament to the joy she had found in her new life. Maya grew into a young woman with her father's kind heart and her mother's fierce spirit, her laughter, a constant bright melody in their home. They traveled the world, not as tourists, but as explorers, seeking out hidden corners and quiet places, far from the clamor of the world they had left behind. Built a life that was rich, not in material possessions, but in experiences, in love, in connection. It was a life that was a quiet rebellion against the values that had once defined them, a testament to the fact that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the currency of human connection. Their story became a quiet legend in the publishing world. a modern-day fairy tale that inspired a generation of readers. People were drawn to its message of hope and its belief in the power of love to transcend social divides. But for Liam and Catherine, it was never about the fame or the accolades. It was about the simple truth of their own lives, a truth they lived every day in the quiet moments they shared on their porch by the sea, a truth that was as constant and as enduring as the tides one evening as they were watching the sunset. Maya, now a young woman with dreams of her own, turned to them and said, "You know, your story is my favorite." Ham smiled and pulled her into a hug. "It's my favorite too." And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, they sat in a comfortable silence, their hearts full of a gratitude so profound it needed no words. They had found their way to each other through a storm, and they had built a love that was a shelter from all the storms to come. A love that was a beacon of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, light of human kindness can shine through a love that was a testament to the simple yet profound truth that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one person, one umbrella, and one simple act of love. He looked at the two women beside him, his daughter, now a budding artist with a sketchbook always in hand, and his wife, her face softened by years of laughter and contentment. The lines around her eyes were not from stress, but from joy, a map of a life well lived and well loved. He had come so far from the tired, desperate man he had been all those years ago. The man who stood in the rain with nothing but a broken umbrella and a heart full of fear. He had been a man who had thought his story was over. A man who had believed that happiness was a luxury he could no longer afford, but Catherine had changed all that she had shown him. That his story was just beginning. She had taught him to dream again, to hope again, to love again. She had been his anchor, his compass, his North Star. She had been his salvation. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a familiar, comfortable gesture that still sent a thrill through him. She looked at him and smiled, a smile that held a universe of shared memories and unspoken understanding. "What?" she asked, her voice soft and teasing. "Am I getting sentimental in my old age?" "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm just grateful. Grateful for her, for Maya, for this life, for the second chance he had never expected to receive." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, one by one, like tiny diamonds scattered on a velvet cloth, he knew that this was it. This was everything. This was the happy ending he had only ever read about in books. But it was his. It was real, and it was more beautiful than any story he could have ever written, a testament to the enduring power of love, the quiet strength of the human spirit, and the simple, profound magic of an umbrella shared in the rain. Their life was not without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments when the ghosts of their pasts would whisper in their ears. But they faced them together, hand in hand. Their love, a shield against the blank, their 7-3 darkness. They had learned that true strength was not about being unbreakable, but about being willing to be vulnerable, to be seen in all your flawed and messy glory. And in that vulnerability, they found a connection that was deeper and more profound than anything they had ever known. Their home was a sanctuary, a place of peace and creativity, where they were free to be their truest selves. It was a home filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of paint, and the comforting presence of books. It was a home built not on a foundation of money or status, but on a foundation of love, trust, and mutual respect. And as the years went on, their love only grew deeper, stronger, more resilient. It was a love that was a constant source of inspiration. A reminder that even in a world that can often feel cold and unforgiving, there is still beauty, there is still hope, and there is still magic. It was a love that was a legacy, a story that would be passed down. through generations, a timeless tale of two souls who found each other in the storm and created a life that was more beautiful than any they could have ever imagined. A life that was a testament to the fact that the greatest love stories are not the ones that are perfect, but the ones that are real, the ones that are messy, the ones that are true, a love that was and always would be their greatest masterpiece.